Absolutely nothing beats windshield time. Welcome back to Dan the Road Trip Guy, a podcast where we have candid conversations about life lessons learned on the road. I'm your host, Bimmer enthusiast and road trip extraordinaire, Dan Neal. And now, on to the show. My guest today is Todd Henry, and I've been looking forward to this episode since I invited him. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous speaking with him. He started a podcast in 2005. He's the author of several books and goes around the world speaking to people about productivity and work and creativity. I'm just excited to learn a little bit more about him. We've never met in person. We have a mutual friend, and we're going to take a virtual road trip today. So welcome to Dan the Road Trip Guy, Todd Henry.
Dan, it is great to be here. I can't wait to see where this conversation goes.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, I'd like to start with just take a couple minutes and tell my listeners who you are, because probably a lot of them might not have any idea.
Sure. Yeah. So I am an author. I've written 6 books. I travel and I consult and I speak and advise and help people and teams understand how to be creative under pressure. That's primarily my job these days. So anybody who has to solve problems under pressure and within a certain time frame, a certain budget, I help them understand some of the dynamics that can get in the way and how to move beyond that. Informally, I kind of cheekily like to call myself an arms dealer for the creative revolution. So that's my primary role, is I write and I speak and I teach.
Yeah, and I think there's nobody out there under pressure today, right, in the business world?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe a little bit. I think a few people, the 5 people that I've discovered are feeling a little bit of pressure. Yes.
There you go. This is Dan the Road Trip Guy, and I love road trips. I love cars, but I love talking to people. I'm always curious, do you have a first car story or just an interesting car story that you can share with us?
I do. I have a car story and I have a road trip story. The road trip story has nothing to do with me driving, and I also have a car story. So which one would you prefer?
Well, let's go with the car story first, and then we'll figure out.
Great.
We might talk about your travels, because you've been places too. So.
Okay, great. So my first car was a Pontiac Grand Am, which doesn't even exist anymore. One of my responsibilities, given that I was allowed to use this car when I was a teenager, was I had to take my sister to school every day. Well, I grew up in the country, and going to school meant driving, 10 to 12 miles to get to her school, which was the junior high school. And then I'd have to turn around and drive all the way back to the high school, which was, 10 miles from the junior high school. And so we did that day after day after day. Well, I was a huge fan of Billy Joel growing up, and I had Billy Joel's Greatest Hits Volume 1 and 2, the cassette tape, in my car. And I mean, I wore that thing out. I mean, I listened to it over and over and over again constantly. And my sister one day got really tired of listening to Billy Joel, and so she decided she was going to reject the cassette tape and toss it out the window. And that's exactly what she did.
Okay.
And we were probably about maybe 4 miles from the junior high school, and I decided, well, okay, that's fine. You can get out and walk the rest of the way to school. So I dropped my junior high age sister off about 4 miles from school, and she walked the rest of the way to school. So for whatever reason, that Billy Joel tape is tied forever to my first car, and my sister having to make that little jaunt to get to school is forever tied with my memory of that first car as well. And she reminds me of it every time I see her, by the way. And she did not tell my parents, because she knew she had done something wrong as well. She knew that she would get in trouble for having done what she did. And so we kind of just agreed to keep it as a pact between us. We would never tell our parents what happened.
Oh, great story. Didn't keep that car, of course, probably, right?
No, I did not keep it. It did not last me. It lasted me through college, which was great, but didn't get me much beyond that.
Well, that's good. Yeah. You mentioned road trips. When you were young, did your family take road trips?
We did. As a matter of fact, my most memorable road trip was in 1984. And I remember it was 84 because it was, I think, the year Karate Kid came out, the movie. We took a road trip to Myrtle Beach. The reason I remember is because we had, my grandfather had a truck bed camper.
Okay.
And we, I don't know if I don't even know if they have these anymore because they're probably illegal now. But the kind of camper that you like put on a truck bed, and then you can sort of like strap it down and drive down the road with the camper in the bed of a pickup truck. Except, you're not really supposed to be in the camper when you're driving down the road because they're not exactly secure. But our entire family basically spent the entire trip in the camper, in the truck bed camper on the way to Myrtle Beach. And that was probably, I don't know, a 10-hour, 11-hour drive.
Yeah, for sure.
All of us in the truck bed camper as we're like hobbling down the road. And at one point, my uncle decided, hey, it'd be kind of a funny trick to, maybe lean out the window, kind of peek out the window and kind of crawl around the side of the camper and wave at the people who were driving the pickup truck. And he did. And I have vivid memories, even as a child at that point. I think I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I have vivid memories of thinking this is the last I'm ever going to see of my uncle because this is just a profoundly terrible idea, right?
Right.
But again, one of those memories that just kind of fixed in my head. So I think between the story of the car with my sister and the story of the truck bed camper, you have a pretty good idea of my environment growing up and some of the crazy ends we got into.
Well, it's probably not much different than mine. I grew up in the country too, down in kind of south central Kentucky, straight down 75. Yeah, I saw a lot of people riding in the back of pickup trucks when I was growing up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we used to, obviously we used to do that after Little League games. You just hop in the back of the pickup truck and go get ice cream. Nobody thought anything about it. Now it's very likely you'd be arrested for doing that. If you're driving with a group of kids in your pickup truck. So.
Yeah, if you were parents, your kids would probably be taken away from you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we jump around back there. We do crazy stuff, But anyway.
Yeah, people are missing out today. I'm guessing in the back of those pickup trucks and those campers, there was a lot of that going on. People riding in those campers, so people just didn't know.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story. Any road trip stories recently?
We during COVID, when COVID first happened, we had a family trip planned to Costa Rica, and that family trip unfortunately had to be canceled because obviously everything was canceled for quite a while. And my father-in-law had a place in Florida at the time. Our family decided, you know what, if we all get in the car, because the kids aren't in school. The kids I think they had just gotten out of school, maybe.
Okay.
We thought, nobody's going anywhere. We're not really supposed to be anywhere. But if we get in the car and just kind of stay among ourselves, we could basically drive straight to Florida, and we could just kind of social distance at his place with him. And so we did that. We got in the car and drove 16 hours straight. I think I stopped maybe twice to get gas on the way down. But the reason it's memorable is because, we're sort of in the middle of this time where it felt like the world had stopped. And just to have that time as a family in the car to do something that was meaningful and special, and to go to a place and to be with him and to have those experiences with him was really pretty remarkable. It felt a little bit like freedom during a time when it felt like for good reasons, but it felt like so many of us were, kind of just cocooning and didn't really have much to experience at that point. That was a very recent road trip, just a couple of years ago, but was very, very meaningful to our family and really, I think, resulted in a lot of bonding that we wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting too for us was everything was closed down basically at that point. But in Florida, if you had an outdoor area of your restaurant, you could open the outdoor area. That was, around here, nobody was eating anywhere. But down there, it was just nice to be able to go to a restaurant and eat outside, or just to have that experience was kind of fun because this was very, very early in the beginning days of the pandemic. Yeah, it's definitely a great memory of that time.
So you have a company called Accidental Creative. You started that, I believe, in 2005, if my research is correct. So what'd you do before that, and what took you to doing that?
I studied marketing in school, graduated from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, with a marketing degree. And of course, like any good marketing major, I decided to do a tour of duty in the music business. So I spent a number of years in Nashville, back and forth between Nashville and here, writing music, performing music, and basically trying to figure out how to make my living as an artist, as a musician.
Okay.
And had a little bit of success doing that. We had the ability to tour with and open for a number of people, a number of big acts and artists, got to play some pretty fun venues, but also, like happens, played some really small venues and for some less than adoring crowds while doing that, and was really struggling to kind of make a living doing that. And as many of these stories go, I met a girl, and she, very rightly said, "Hey, I think maybe there's something else here for us. So why don't we try to figure out, give up some parameters around this and chase it for maybe another year, and then we'll see what the momentum is like." And at the end of that year, realized that, things weren't really accelerating. Things were kind of holding steady, and it was probably time for me to figure out something else to do. And so I ended up as the creative director for a nonprofit for a handful of years, and it started as a very small team. And then that team grew over time until I had a number of people who were reporting to me, or people who had people reporting to those people.
Sure.
And in the middle of that, really just started doing some research into, okay, how do I keep these people engaged and fresh and producing great work? Because we were producing a tremendous amount of work. I had incredibly talented people on the team, most of whom had been in really high stress corporate environments, at various times. And we're doing, literally work that the entire world had been experiencing, So how do I lead these people? And I started reaching out to creative directors here in Cincinnati, where I'm based. And they would just say, well, I don't know. We just kind of burn through people and bring in a fresh crop, right? Like nobody really had any good strategies. And so I thought, well, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And so I started doing some research and figured out some things that worked. It seemed to be working for the team. And right around that time, this is the mid 2000s, this new thing called podcasting was starting to come on the scene. And I thought, well, this is kind of cool. You can just kind of talk into a microphone and people can listen to it whenever they want to. And so I started a podcast called The Accidental Creative and kind of forgot about it. Honestly, I put about 5 episodes out, and iTunes was a thing at the time, which was the place people went to get music, but they also had just started this podcasting directory. So I kind of forgot about it. I went back looking for podcasts to listen to, and there was a podcast called The Accidental Creative that was one of the top podcasts on iTunes. And I thought that I'd stolen someone else's name. I thought, oh no, I should have checked first, but it turns out it was my podcast that was one of the top podcasts on iTunes at the time. And I suddenly had thousands of people listening to this show that I'd only started as a whim. And I thought, boy, I think I've really hit a nerve here. I think maybe there are other people who are also dealing with some of these things I'm struggling with. And so that podcast continues to this day, actually, 18 years later, I guess. That podcast then led to invitations to go and spend some time with companies and speak at conferences and other things and share some of these insights that I was sharing on the show, and led to a book deal with Penguin Random House shortly thereafter. And I made the full-time leap into doing my consulting work right around that time. And really for the last 15 years now, I've been traveling the world and working with teams, leaders, and helping them understand how to be prolific, brilliant, and healthy all at the same time.
Yeah, I went looking for that first podcast. I haven't found it yet, so I'm still looking for it. I went back as far
I think
Go ahead.
The catalog right now I think only goes back to maybe 2000. Well, I think probably 2018, because we only go back 300 episodes on the feed. But I think the oldest you can find is maybe from 2013, 2014. Because some of those early episodes were casualties to the technology of the time. They don't exactly sound up to snuff for today's podcasting world.
Well, yeah. And as I told you, I'm new to this and I'm getting better with each one, and the quality's getting better. My wife bought me a good microphone. First ones, they're a little rough, but I did find yours from 2018. That was the first one in the catalog. And it was very good because I think you were talking about your friend who started Breather. And it was just about when to launch, get out there and launch your idea and stop thinking about it and stop procrastinating, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so many of the early episodes were me talking about topics. And then I thought, I really want to interview some people that I respect and admire. So the first person I reached out to was Stephen Pressfield, who wrote a book called The War of Art. And this was in 2007. Okay. And so I interviewed Stephen for the show, and I've re-released that episode a couple of times over the years just for fun. But I'll never forget at the very end of the interview, I said, Stephen, how was that interview for you? And he said that it was great. He said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. And he said, what's a podcast? And I thought, oh boy, I guess
Okay.
maybe I am on the early end of this, because he had done radio interviews, but he didn't know what a podcast was. So I thought, well, I think I may have been his first ever podcast interview, which is kind of fun.
I think my wife and I still have friends. So I'm 62. I think we have friends who I'll send them links to a podcast and I'm not even sure they know how to open it. So
Sure.
we go there.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned you're an author also. You've written several books. I'm in the midst of Die Empty. Is there a favorite book you've written?
Boy,
Or is that like children? It's like children. They're all my favorite.
A little bit. Yeah, it is a little bit like that. I don't know if there's a favorite one. I think I like each of them for different reasons. I do think Die Empty is the one that has had the most global impact. So
Okay.
I have people reaching out to me from around the world who have read Die Empty and have because it's been translated into a number of languages. And matter of fact, I've been talking to some people from a country that I probably otherwise would never have influence in, who had read the book. And there are all these groups and masterminds happening in the country in Africa, and then one country in Asia that I'm going to be visiting, where they want me to come speak about it. So that's probably the one I think that has had the most global resonance and is really fun to see.
Yeah, and it's 10 years old, maybe?
It is. Yeah, it came out in September of 2013.
Yeah.
So
and as I've read through it, sorry, I hadn't read it before. And I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a bunch of Todd Henry books and start reading them. But that one just struck me. And I'm thinking it's still so relevant for today.
Well, I tried to write based upon universal principles. And I think what's interesting is, I've gone back and reread that book a couple of times. And what's interesting to me is that I always personally, even as the author, I always take away something different every time I read it, which is, I think, the mark of of a book that's timeless, is when you can read it multiple times and still feel like it's fresh every time. So I'm proud of the research and the work that went into that book and the writing that went into it. And I'm grateful for my amazing team of editors at Penguin Random House and the people who helped pull that together, because I think we were able to craft something that will hopefully stand the test of time. The fact that it's still in print, a decade later, means it's hopefully still going to be in print for a while to come.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, congratulations on the success of that and continued success. Hey, I'll jump to a question here, and oddly, I'll take it out of your book. I usually ask people what's on their bucket list, but I'll ask you from the very first part of Die Empty, and it's from somebody else. But before I die, I want to blank. So I'll pose that question to you.
Yeah, well, before I die, I would like to take a trip and it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I would just say, I want to take a trip internationally with my family, or a couple of trips. And we've actually already done that and have planned more. But what I would like to do, I think, is I would like to take actually do a trip of Italy with some friends. We've been talking about that for a while. So I think that would be a really fun thing to experience with our core group of friends. We have, in our neighborhood, where we've planted ourselves, we have really developed some amazing close friendships with people in our neighborhood. And many of them, what's interesting is some of them I went to college with, and we all sort of randomly ended up settling in the same little neighborhood, and we're raising our kids together, which is a pretty rare thing, that you get to do that span of life with one group of people who have seen you, in college, and they've seen you as a young adult, and they've seen you as a young married adult, and they've seen you as a parent. And, we're sort of going through these stages of life together, which is really fun.
Yeah, not very common today as people scatter about the globe, actually.
Very true.
Well, that would be a great trip. You've traveled a lot of places. Do you have a favorite place you've been?
Oh boy, favorite is tricky. I just got back from Puebla, Mexico, where I spoke at Festival de las Ideas, so Festival of the Ideas, which was really fun. It's a beautiful city. Puebla is beautiful. James Cameron was one of the other speakers, so it was fun getting to hear him speak, and a number of other people spoke at the event. I really enjoyed Puebla. I really enjoyed Istanbul, beautiful place, and had a little bit of time while I was there to explore, the markets and some of the mosques and whatnot. So it was really beautiful as well. So I'd say probably those two places are the most memorable.
Yeah, that's cool. Question I love to ask, back to road trips. If you could take a road trip with anyone today, living or deceased, who'd it be? Where would you go? Maybe even what would you drive? Maybe that Pontiac.
Probably not the Pontiac.
Yeah,
No,
for
definitely
sure
not the
not the
Pontiac.
Pontiac. Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to maybe be a little bit of a head turn answer, but I think Benjamin Franklin.
Hmm.
And the reason is, I mean, the guy was a polymath. I mean, he was a political genius. He was a scientist. He was an artist. He was an entrepreneur. He had done so many different things. And to experience life through his eyes and to ask him questions about his experiences, I think would be really fascinating. So probably Benjamin Franklin. Where would we go? I think I probably would probably drive to Washington, D.C., just because I think that would be an interesting culmination of our journey, and probably interesting for him as well if he didn't, have experience of modern day DC.
Yeah.
What would we drive?
Probably going to
I
drive
mean,
an EV, right?
yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to drive some kind of electric vehicle, whatever that is, whether it's a Tesla or something else, because you know, given it's Ben Franklin, right? So hey,
Exactly.
look what thou hast wrought, by doing your experiments. So yeah, I think that'd be really fun.
That'd be great. Hey, I'm going to ask you a question here. So, we're getting along here in our little virtual road trip around Cincinnati, but in your book, Die Empty, you had words there that said busily bored, and that just caught my
hmm
eye. I was wondering if you could share 2 or 3 pieces of advice that for my listeners that maybe they feel stuck or bored or not living up full potential.
hmm
What would you tell them to do? What would be those 3 pieces of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, this term busily bored refers to, a group of people who I experience often. These are people who are very busy. They have a lot going on in their life, but they're bored. And I know that they're bored because they're not asking important questions. They're ignoring important questions because maybe they don't want the answer to those questions, because when you ask inconvenient questions, you sometimes get inconvenient answers that force you to act. The first bit of advice I would give to people is to ask themselves if they are falling for any ghost rules. Ghost rules are invisible narratives or assumptions that are limiting their engagement. They're things we believe like, well, that's just the way it is, or that'll never work around here, or I could never do something like that. It's a ghost rule. It's an invisible narrative.
Mm.
But sometimes people believe them. They allow them to shape and define their life. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is ask yourself, what is your defining question right now? In other words, what is the single question that if I were to pursue it and answer it might unlock untold value for me as a leader or as a professional? Again, I think we often ignore the questions that are simmering just beneath the surface because they're inconvenient questions. Ask those important questions. And then the third thing is make sure that you're filling your mind with valuable stimuli. We live in a world where we are bombarded by bits of information, stimulus, things that are thrown at us. But we often don't take time to study, to digest, to analyze the patterns, to think. I mean, so many people don't even know what they think because we just kind of move through life. We never stop to process and synthesize and form patterns. And so make sure that you're building time into your life to absorb valuable stimulus and to synthesize those patterns and to understand what it is you actually think about what's going on around you. So those would be my 3 best pieces of advice for people who are busily bored. And by the way, for leaders who are listening, the most valuable thing you bring to any environment is your intuition. It's your ability to synthesize. And if you're not taking time to step back and to process and to think and to understand the patterns that are going on around you, you are failing a fundamental responsibility that you have as a leader, which is to bring that perspective to the table every single day. And you can't do that if you're busily bored.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for that. And if people want to know more, they can reach out to you, and I'm sure you can help them. But I appreciate that. That's just great advice. And, I think today, you said this in your book, and this was back in 2013. You walk into a Starbucks and everybody's on their phone. And it seems like today we're just bombarded with, when I think back to when I grew up, we had two channels. We got the news for 30 minutes a day, and that was it. And then the rest of the day, you just kind of spent thinking about life and what you're going to do.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, hey, this has been a pleasure for me. I hope so for you, just to virtually drive around Cincinnati here and chat for a little bit. Before we leave, let people know how to find you, find your books, and hopefully they'll check you out.
Yeah. So, toddhenry.com is my website. That's where you can find the podcast, the Accidental Creative Podcast. If you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast listener. So check out the Accidental Creative Podcast or visit toddhenry.com. And there you can get to anything else I do, including my newsletter and my books and everything else. My books are available wherever books are sold. So just search for Todd Henry and it'll bring up all of my things.
All right. Again, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Dan the Road Trip Guy, and we look forward to having you back again next time. In the meantime, if you want to find me, you can find me on the internet at Danny, D-A-N-N-Y, Neal, Neal.com. Until we meet up again, keep having conversations and keep driving.